This evening we're going to discuss the topic of the day as we read from Living Wisely, Living Well. Today's topic is on negative thinking, and Swami starts off, avoid negative thinking. Remember, whatever you project outward to the world will return to you. A boomerang effect is inevitable. Well, this topic about negative thinking, not only should we include thinking, but negative action, negative words, negative thoughts, negative attitudes, negative expectations, all of these things we need to include under the same heading of negativity. And this topic of negative thinking is just the tip of the iceberg of a much, much larger topic. You could say that this dichotomy between negativity and positiveness is a representation of the entire spiritual path. The spiritual path itself is one of these forces of negativity at battle with those of positiveness. And we see this expressed in the Bhagavad Gita, and we see it expressed in all great scriptures. There's these two sides of life. That flow of energy, that flow of thought, that flow of spirit and inspiration that is moving positively toward a goal, and that other flow that is leading away from that, or you might say also resisting that upward flow. And this, when we speak about avoid negative thinking, we have to ask the question, what do we mean when we say negative thinking? And some people might say, well, when you say negative thinking, you might start to just list, say, well, don't think this, or A, B, C, and D, and outwardly or specifically define what negative thinking is. But really, it's something more, you might say, more vast than that. What is negativity? What's positivity? Well, we have to look at what the destiny is for each of our souls. We have to look at the natural, intrinsic direction that we want, in which we want to evolve. And what positive thinking, you could say, is any, or positivity, is any directional movement that is upward. You might say, if we look at the body, upward, a life force moving up toward the brain, but you could also say in a direction of soul freedom. Anything that is moving or is taking us in a direction of soul freedom is defined as a positive direction. And of course, negative thinking or negativity would be any action or any thoughts or any deeds, those things that take us downward. Literally in the body, that's a downward flow of life force, downward in the spine, that is, and outward out into the senses and engagement with the world. Anything that takes us into bondage or away from freedom. And when we say bondage, we mean bondage in egotism. Those things that separate me and you from one another, those things that ultimately lead us to suffering, those things that take us away from our own happiness, all of these things, this is what we would call negative things, those things that negatively take us in that direction. And so you can see very typically when you think of somebody's, they're a very negative person. Well, usually a very negative person tends to be somebody who's in the end not very happy. Those person that is positive person, it's associated with somebody who is more joyful or more uplifted. Because joy and expansion and upward flow of life force and ultimately freedom in God, these are what all of us deep down in our soul are looking for. And so when we say avoid negative thinking, we're saying avoid those things or those thoughts that are going to attract to us the end result, which is not our happiness, the opposite of that. And I think you could say we start with thinking, because from thinking comes thoughts, or our thoughts, and from thoughts comes actions, words, and deeds. They follow. If we watch our thinking, well, then we find inevitably the rest of it will follow. This is something that Master Paramahansa Yogananda was very strong about, is being able to keep our mind positively engaged in a positive direction. And it's also something that in my association over many years, decades actually, with Swami Kriyananda, it's also something he was very, very firm about, is be positive, don't be negative. Swami Kriyananda would often quote Master about a comment he made about negative people. He says, when you have a crowd, you could have a big crowd, and if there's two negative people in the crowd, somehow they'll always inevitably sniff each other out because they're attracted one to another. When you think a certain way, you naturally begin to harmonize with those people that think very similarly to you. You attract those people to you, and so you'll see this. People that are perhaps very sarcastic or cynical in a group of people, other people who are similar in that way, they'll be attracted to them too, and they tend to then form a little group that creates a dynamism and a certain power in the group that is sort of a negative vortex of energy that begins to pull other people into it. And this, of course, is what we want to avoid, because we might be one of those people that ends up being pulled into that vortex of negativity, of fault finding, of casting aspersions, or overly skeptical or cynical. And I think we can all recognize what we say when we say somebody, oh, that person's negative, that's a very negative cast of mind. We know that there's what we're speaking about, and there's a certain darkness, you might say, to them that is attractive in its own way. And that's the insidious thing, because negativity has a certain attractiveness to it, just as positivity does too. But we tend to be attracted to people that vibrate in some way on the same wavelength with us. And this is, in this reading, this is why Swami was saying in that reading, he says, avoid negative thinking, because it has a boomerang effect. Because as we think, so we become. And if we start to think negatively, we begin to draw that to ourselves. Now, I think a very classic, you might say, dichotomy between negative thinking and positive thinking, and it's only a very slight image. I don't want you to take this too seriously, but when people say, what type of person are you? Are you a person who sees the glass half empty or half full? And now I don't want to make too much of that, because it could be seen either way. But nevertheless, when you look at a glass as half empty, there's sort of you're projecting an expectation, you might say, on that. You're seeing it half full, you're seeing it, well, it's on its way to becoming full, versus half empty, it's on its way to being drained, and there's not going to be anything left in that glass. You're projecting an expectation on that. So if you see life in terms of an expectation that life is going to be good, life is positive, life is wonderful, if you see it in that positive way, you're going to have an expectation on that. And expectations are a type of thought, and they're very powerful. When expectations have a way of being met, because very subtly, when we see life in a certain way with an expectation for something to happen, we put into motion certain forces that actually, unseen to us, actually cause that expectation to actually happen. So if we expect something to be, this play I'm going to tonight, it's going to be terrible. Well, probably if you go into the play that way, it's going to be terrible, because your expectations, you're prejudiced already. You see, the mind is very subtle. It prejudices what we look at, and we look at the world, we think we look at the world neutrally, but we don't. We're you might say, casting a filter on the world, and we're seeing that world through a certain filter of our own biases and prejudices. And if those tend to be a filter of failure, of it's not going to be good, it's terrible, oh, this person I'm going to meet tonight, I'm going to have such a lousy time, it's not going to be fun. Oh, well, you're likely to find that as you think, so it's going to become. So if we can learn to see the potential, the positive potential of life in a very simple way. Now, when I say this, people say, well, I don't look at it that way. I see it just as it is. I'm totally rational. I'm totally unbiased. I don't believe it. Until a person has overcome the ego, until a person has overcome in other words, one's likes and dislikes of the heart, it's very difficult to be totally unbiased. We are biased, and I think one of the marks of a person that's wise, self-aware, is that they can realize their own inner biases and be able to work with that. And you might say filter out to some degree some of those inner biases. But this is, you see this as in application with some of the things that Swami Kriyananda said, advised us who were his students. And you see this also in Master's life as well. Master said, never call yourself a sinner. Because if you do, it's the same thing. It's negative thinking. You're basically seeing yourself in a negative light. Or as Swami would often say, that never say that you failed. Well, I mean, he said, what do you say then? Well, of course, everybody who knows Swami knows the answer to that. I haven't succeeded yet, is the way Swami would say that. Because then we're affirming success as the potential, rather than failure as my fate, you might say. I'm not a sinner. I'm a saint, as Master said, who refuses to give up. And I'm going to keep working at it until I accomplish what it is that I want to accomplish, especially in my spiritual life. Now, so one of the things that Swami advised, and he's in this regard of negative thinking, he said a person, and particularly people perhaps you might say who are too overly rational, they tend to look at life in a very rational way, and they can pick it apart intellectually, and they see the problems. He says problem consciousness is another way to define negative thinking. And because we see the problem, the thing that has limited me, or the thing that has blocked my upward flow, in this case a solution. So that which has blocked my upward flow is a problem. And so they begin to see the problems. Now, Swamiji was very strong about this. He says, don't be problem consciousness, be solution consciousness. Now, does this mean that we should be oblivious to what the problems are in life? And no, it doesn't mean that. What he was saying is don't obsess on the problem and keep looking for the problems, because what it will do is it will consume you and make it impossible for the solution side of yourself to come into play. You see, because they come from different parts of our consciousness. The problem with problem consciousness is that it's the rational mind, it's the logical mind that sees life as it is and the potential of what it is, and it sees what's wrong with the situation. Well, solution consciousness is actually looking for something that does not yet exist. It's from the creative mind, and you could say solutions come from a realm that they exist already as potentials, but we have to be able to draw them down into our everyday life. And this is an aspect of the superconscious mind. You see, to be solution consciousness is to attune, to be aware of the problem, you see, but then to be focusing our attention onto a higher level of our consciousness, our awareness, our intuition, and to be open to be able to draw down the solution. So you can see if your problem, looking at this problem, oh, that's a problem, that is not going to work, this won't work, this won't work. You've been in meetings like this where you come up with a possible solution, and the person will say, oh, that's impossible, it's not going to work. Okay, then you come up with another, oh, that's impossible, it's not going to work. And what happens? You see the flow of energy begins to be blocked. Pretty soon you're stuck right here with the problem. But solutions come when we can create a flow of energy. And in that flow, there's a magnetism. Any flow of life force creates around it the flow of energy, which is magnetic, and it attracts to it that solution. So consequently, you often see this application used when they have brainstorming sessions. I'm sure you've been to these. And one of the things we do at brainstorming sessions is we'll say, people will come up with many silly ideas, but it's not allowed to criticize any of them. Just let them go, and we'll write them down, and then we'll keep going until more and more. And then finally you find that even coming up with silly ideas, it stimulates, and pretty soon a person comes up with a better idea, and a better idea, and a better idea. And this is an aspect of learning to be solution-oriented, always looking for solutions. And I think it's a good discipline, you could say, for us to, yes, we have to be aware of the problem, but whenever you see a problem, simultaneously couple it with looking for a solution as well. So you find, so I see a problem. Oh, something isn't working. Well, what can I do to fix that? And then you start to find the solution to it. And then this will help to stimulate a positive flow of energy. I had a friend who, when he was in college, on his summer vacation, he wanted to make money, and so he had a job going door to door selling encyclopedias. Now, this was in the day before the internet. You don't sell sets of encyclopedias anymore, but when I was a kid, younger man, they would buy the big set, this Britannica or what all. And so you go door to door. So naturally, when you're selling door-to-door salesman trying to sell a set of encyclopedias, you're not going to get many positive responses. But his trainer, who sent him out, they gave him a good piece of advice, which he passed on later, that he liked. He says his trainer had told him, he says, you're going to knock on the door, and most people are going to say no. He says, but don't become discouraged. Just think, that's one more no I've got out of the way until I get to the next door, until I get to a yes. And so because there are a certain percentage of yeses out there, I guarantee you from long experience, you just have to get the no's out of the way. And so look at it that way. And so he did that, and I can't say he was successful at it, but you see it put a positive spin on it, because he was moving, it kept him moving forward until finally it probably did eventually attract somebody that says yes. Now, the thing about negative thinking, now when we know people that perhaps we would classify as negative, and we can see the impact that one negative person in a group can have a great impact beyond just the one person. It's like they say, one bad apple in a barrel can infect that and make all the apples go bad. Well, what we have to, it's true. Negativity causes problems to other people, but the real problem with negativity, if we tend to be, problem consciousness, overly highly skeptical, to a fault, to the point where it stops that flow of energy, what it does, it's not that so much that, yes, it does affect everybody else, but what it really is doing is affecting us, because it's blocking us, it's limiting us, it's putting a barrier on our life force inwardly, our inspiration, our intuition, that sense of joyfulness. It puts a cap on it. So we end up being the one that is ultimately harmed by that. And so we have to do what we can to try to avoid that. Now there's two sides. One, you have to avoid those things that are going to stimulate that. And of course we have to do something positive at the same time. Now, what are those things that you might say stimulate that negative thinking? One of the best things you can do is watch your environment. This applies not only to this, but you might say to most things in life. If we look at this idea of negative thinking as emblematic of the entire spiritual path, it does apply to everything, because the spiritual path is so much influenced by our environment. We are influenced by our cosmic environment, by our world environment, our physical environment, and particularly by our social environment, our spiritual environment. So consequently, as I mentioned, one person who's negative can have great impact, and that negativity is magnetic, and we can find ourselves being attracted to that because it stimulates within us samskars, impressions, or tendencies that we have in ourselves. So be cautious. And I think, I know when I was younger, and unfortunately, maybe even still today, I have a little remnant of it. I like to joke. I used to like to joke a lot, and which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but if you keep it in moderation. But I tended to be a little bit sarcastic in my joking, and maybe I have a little remnants of that. Well, what happens is I affirm to myself, I've got to get over this thing, because sarcasm can be a little bit hurtful, and it's not an uplifting thing, take it to extreme. And so I began to try to change that habit. I always said, this isn't something I need to do. But I would find that sometimes I'd get in the company of old friends who were really good at sarcastic humor, and I couldn't help myself. We would just be going on and on and on, being sarcastic, joking. And I just realized that I just had to stay away from that, because otherwise I'd never get over that habit. Now, that's not a terrible habit, but nevertheless, it's an example of perhaps even some worse habits that we all might have. That our environment, as they say, is stronger than willpower. And if we want to cure this negative tendency that I think to some degree most of us have, we should choose our environments wisely. And so naturally we want to avoid people if we do notice there are certain negative people. One tendency of mind comes up and say, well, I'm gonna help that person. I'm gonna cure that person of their negativity. Now that's very honorable, but be careful. Be careful. know the boundaries of what you can do. This applies not just to negativity. It's because it's as Master explained, and Swami reiterated this. He says it's like two magnets, and he said when two magnets, if they're of equal strength, the negative will start to overwhelm and pull down the positive. You have to be really a strong soul to be able to uplift somebody who's of a worse caste, you might say, in this regard than you. So be careful of that. And at the same time, you want to associate yourself with positive magnets, positive people that are positive, that have a positive spirit, because that too then becomes a habit. You begin to think in terms of solutions. You begin to think in terms of, what can I do? How can I make this better? How can I just say yes to life rather than saying no, no, no? And so that's probably one of the most important first things to start with, is associate with positive people, and try to keep your distance a little bit if you really notice somebody's negative. You can help them, but sometimes you have to do it from a distance. Now, obviously, we have to change those habits. You have to pick a habit. If you see something, like I was saying, sarcasm, I thought, I don't want to do that too much anymore. Take something and try to work at it and pay attention at that. And you'll find that if you can improve one habit, it has this interesting effect. If you can change one bad habit that you have, let's say you're a smoker. I don't smoke, but let's say you did. And if you can cure that one bad, maybe it's not a terrible habit, but it's certainly not a good one. If you can overcome that one habit, you'll see in some strange way other negative habits too begin to be overcome, because you've gained the strength in that one way that then is applicable in other ways as well, and they naturally go together. You find if you can raise your life force a little bit on one part of your life, others come up as well. So you don't have to improve yourself on every possible habit. Take some the ones that you have a good chance of succeeding at. Take those first, and then get some success under your belt, and then little by little by little you begin to see that you can change. And then of course you could say association, habits, and the other one would be attitudes, of course. His attitude, that frame of mind that naturally is the directing force. It's the sails that will cause which way your ship is going to go. So those attitudes, those are a little harder. There's a little, but they will come, and they'll come in time. If you notice that you have one, rather than trying to change it, sometimes the best you can do is simply restrain it. Keep it in a fence, you might say, limit it so it doesn't do too much damage until time goes by. Some attitudes that are tamasic, as it says in the Gita, only it's like in the womb, and only time itself has to pass until ultimately it can be overcome. And so that's how we need to approach it. Be realistic with what those things that you can change right now, those things that are going to take a little bit of time, and then you might say just quarantine those a little bit, and then in time you'll be able to have the strength. One particular one that I wanted to mention of negative thinking is what Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, where he talks about the carping spirit. He says, "To you, O Arjuna, who have overcome the carping spirit, I reveal these truths." And that carping spirit is just that fault-finding spirit that says, yes, that's good, but. Yes, that's good, but. And that's the kind, that tendency is what you could say carping, that to always look for the dark side of something, always look for the worm in the apple, you might say. And pretty soon you're not only looking for it, you're also expecting it. And if you expect it, you're going to find something and you're going to manufacture it. You're going to see the blemishes of life. And you'll spend your life looking down. And what happens is it closes the heart, and it makes a person like that is not open to be able to receive guidance, to be able to receive wisdom. And here, Krishna, representing Guru, representing the higher self, representing God, that guidance comes when we've overcome that negativity of the heart that blocks us from being able to receive higher wisdom. One other thing is, I think, I haven't seen Master write this, but my intuition tells me this is so, that I think negativity and just a negative cast of mind is stimulated or embedded or enhanced when we have an over-attachment to things of this world. That could be things, it could also be people, expectations of this world, because what happens when we have expectations and attachments in this world? They're ultimately, they disappoint us, because this world ultimately will disappoint us if that's where we're seeking our pleasures, that's where we're seeking our happiness. And to be overly involved in looking for our happiness in the world around us is going to disappoint us. And when it finally disappoints us again and again and again, we say, "Oh, there, you see?" And you begin to see, it disappointed me again and again, and happiness is not going to be possible for me, because we look for it in the wrong place. And when we keep not finding it, eventually it causes a certain negativity until we break out of that. So obviously, we're looking in the wrong place. We have to learn to be able to look in the right place. We have to look to, where does true happiness lie? True happiness lies within us. And we have to, so consequently, looking within us, looking for the true source of happiness. And if we have a glimmering of that, also, I think concomitant with that, is if we want to create a positive frame of mind, overcome this negative tendency that lies latent in us, we also have to take the positive approach. We have to reinforce a positive cast of mind. And I think one beautiful way to do that is to not wait for good things to come, not wait for joy to come to us, but actively see life with a joyful eye, and actively bless the world or bless other people, and actively put out a positive, I think when you see other people in a positive light, you're giving them a blessing. And this is what we want to do, is we want to bless life. And this is another way of saying, say yes to life. And as Swami would say, he says, be willing. Be willing, don't say no. Don't say, that blocking spirit. When life comes to you, say yes to it, embrace it, and deal with it. And that's saying yes to life, not saying no, no, no. Swami used to say, what comes of itself, let it come. It's yours. If it's rightfully yours to deal with, accept it. Be willing to deal with it. It don't mean you have to like it. I'm not saying that, but you have to deal with it if it's yours. And if you have that attitude of acceptance and a willingness to embrace life and to say yes to life, and an attitude that says, well, I don't know if I can do this, but let me try. Let me try. I'll keep trying. And you take one step, one step, one step. It's like ascending that ladder. And then you find naturally a positiveness comes to you if you have in a company with that, you have a joyful spirit. Be cheerful and even-minded is what Paramahansa Yogananda said. Even-mindedness and cheerfulness. And as far as, and to conclude this today's talk, I'll end with that. Remember what Sister Gyanamata said about Master. She was very willing. Whatever his slightest thought, she'd say yes, and she would do it. And she would advise the other young ladies, the ladies in the ashram there, she says, if Master asks you to do something, say yes and make it snappy. And I think Master, in this case, we might think of it as the world at large. The world at large is asking something from us, to be engaged, to do our duty, to do our dharma, to seek God, and to find truth, to look under the surface. Say yes to that and make it snappy. Many blessings, and we hope to see you again next week.